the visitor. On clear nights in the Atacama, the air feels thinner than glass. It dries the tongue and makes the star soundless and painfully close, as if light has shed its last veil and stands naked on the ridgeline. I used to think that was a romantic thought. Later, when we learned what was staring back, it stopped feeling romantic. The console room hums the way a field hums with insects. Fans, coolant, the slow respiration of an instrument the size of a cathedral. We keep the lights low. The screens are the brightest things for 100 kilometers in any direction. Outside, the dome opens like a pupil. My name hardly matters. I am one of the many whose nights belong to the sky. I work at the giant Magellan telescope in Chile, where the air is sharp and the horizon is honest. I'm a scientist, or I was, and in the beginning I was content to count photons and turn them into meaning. We first noticed it where Neptune combs the dark. It was faint, a scuff of brightness that did not quite belong. You learn to tell when a thing is not a star and not noise. The track was wrong for a solar system object and the eccentricity begged for infinity. The emails came in like small waves. Candidate ISO at RA. Stack suggest motion. Can you confirm? I do not believe in omens, but I remember the way my hand shook when I centered it. A smear of light, then a point with a haze that thought about becoming a tail. We argued in the language of flux and residuals. We said interstellar with the reserve of people who have been wrong before. Someone suggested a name and the social media accounts christened it without asking us. Interstellar comet ophonym, they said, which made a few of us smile. Wheels full of eyes, an angel dragged through vacuum. Officially, it was I, S25A, then a string of digits, then the formal stuff that makes committees comfortable. Unofficially, it became the watcher, the visitor, the eye. I did not like those names. I preferred the number. We built a picture in the first weeks. It behaved like a comet, more or less. A coma appeared as sunlight found something volatile to lift. The color skewed to red. Spectra were stingy with lines that would have reassured us. It outgassed early and oddly. None of it was impossible. All of it was unnerving. In the canteen, we called the anomalies quirks, as if we were talking about a friend who refuses to drink tea after midnight. When it slipped past Mars, it did so in a way that encouraged stories. The pass was close. Not unsafe, not by any meaningful measure, but close enough to put orange dust and ancient riverbeds into the same frame as its ghostly breath. It flared a little, sunlight polishing the coma into a coin. Screens filled with maps and numbers and the voices of colleagues on 3 continents. Someone said, softly, that it looked like it had slowed to look. No one answered. The fans went on humming. Speculation blossomed on Earth. It always does. People are impregnable to uncertainty. They must fill it with stories. There were interviews and panels and quizzes about what we would say to an alien if one visited. The more serious among us repeated the phrase most likely, which is the scientist's version of prayer. Most likely it is natural. Most likely it is ejected detritus of some other sun. Most likely it is indifferent to us. I went on the radio once from the ridge and tried to explain that nothing had happened that violated the universe. I described radiation pressure and sublimation fronts. I talked about how early carbon dioxide can do the work that water does closer in. I said that close is a trick of scale. The host asked me whether I believed in life elsewhere. I said yes and no, and maybe. The line crackled. The wind outside poured at the dome. Then came conjunction. If you were drawing a frightening story, you would draw what happened next. There is a narrow geometry, once in an orbit, where the sun stands between the Earth and a distant thing. We knew the dates to the hour. We could not see it for a while. That happens often. You make your predictions. You wait. The sky yawns and you watch the place where it will come back. You have coffee. You try not to imagine disaster. It did not come back. It is hard to describe the silence in a place that is never loud. Consoles tick time with patient digits. The team fills the quiet with banalities, on purpose. We checked the ephemerides. We ran the numbers again. We asked favors of colleagues on spacecraft with eyes that can stare closer to the sun. Someone joked about ancient gods devouring visitors. The joke flopped and sank. By midnight the second night, rumors had already left the mountain and begun their pilgrimage down to the cities. The sun, some said, had eaten it. A solar geyser had caught it. It had diffracted itself into nothing against light. None of that matched our equations. Our equations said it should return into view, along a line we could draw across the sky with a knife. On the third night, I stayed at the console after my shift. My supervisor pretended not to see me. I set the instruments into a narrow mode to comb the limb of the sun, where the glare is not a wall, but a gauze. It is a stupid thing to do, and not strictly in the book, but we wrote the book, and the book did not know about ophonym. I did not find it. I found a defect that has been in the imaging for years. I found a ghost of the sun's reflected rage. I found a handful of satellites that wanted to be meteors. I drank water and thought about the cold at dawn. I did not find it until morning, and I did not find it so much as it found me. The sun was already up when the algorithms that chase moving dots chirped in a voice we reserve for significance. The plot that appeared on the nearest screen showed a line that was not a line, but a posture. A thing standing exactly where our intuition never looks. It had been hiding in the one place that seduces all our instruments into blindness. Dead center in the line between us and the star. The numbers were too clean. The relative motion was an insult to gravity. I zoomed and zoomed again. On the limb of the disk, the glare thinned, and for a few frames there was a hair's width of shadow where nothing should cast a shadow. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was seeing the scaffold of the telescope in the sky. I called for verification and felt a small part of me peel away and float toward the ceiling. We redirected other eyes. We asked for solar filters and careful subtraction. The thing resolved into a subtractive presence, a subtraction that wore a halo. It was coming down the line toward us, wearing the sun as a cloak. The first press release went out while we were still arguing about how to word it. There is a smell that accompanies panic in a room like ours. Plastic and sweat, and the faint sweetness of flux. Phones began to plead for us from our pockets. A government liaison asked for an assessment of risk, and I told him the truth, which was that we did not know, and that was the risk. When the world understood, it did not breathe. It shouted. Faiths reopened books. Markets sorted shares according to whose God would protect them. The very online announced that salvation was inbound. Others stole food, because food is a story you can eat. I do not judge. I kept my eye on a blot that grew and did not diffuse and did not behave like anything that owed allegiance to ice. As it drew near, the metrics betrayed us. The coma we had measured was a lie, or rather a surface effect that flattered our ignorance. The true magnitude took shape at a range that felt indecent, as if the thing had come inside our home without knocking. The numbers cohered around a diameter that none of us wanted to say aloud. 200 kilometers, give or take a few ways of being wrong. There are words that should not fit into sentences with Earth. Impact, angle, yield. We ran them anyway, because that is what the discipline demands. It was moving close to 200 kilometers a second, and if it chose to keep moving, there would be nothing to simulate afterwards. I found myself thinking in small domestic ways. I thought of the way the kettle in the dormitory takes too long. I thought of the one star in the south that looks like a mistake until you learn its name. I thought of my sister in La Serena, who hates the wind. We did not sleep. The thing barreled down the one line of approach that denies the animal brain the comfort of parallax. It had aligned itself with the sun, and with us, as if it were a hunter, and we were prey that is easier taken when dazzled. It crossed the orbit of the moon and left it swinging in a wake of numbers that seismologists will spend a decade resenting. The auroras came early that day and wandered far beyond the poles, as if the earth had been turned slightly wrong. It stopped. There are verbs that deserve quiet. Stopped is one of them. The graphs did not know how to draw it. The lines built to describe deceleration are accustomed to neighborhood speeds. This was not a braking. It was not a burn. It was a decision. The velocity fell to zero, as if thrown from a bridge and held in the palm of a hand. It settled into an orbit so close we could see, without lenses, the way sunlight considered its surfaces. The first photographs that the public trusted were from phone cameras. People stepped out from their houses and looked up and whispered the same word in many languages. They said moon, then realized their mouths were wrong, then stood for a very long time. Through our mirrors, Ophanim became itself. The coma laid aside, the ice a mask it did not need. We saw a structure that would insult the term ship. It wore arrays that might have been sails and might have been skin. It wore eyes, not lenses, not lit portholes. Eyes. Circles within circles, tessellated across planes that refused to meet at human angles. Sometimes they closed and the reflected sun dulled. Sometimes they opened and the room felt colder. No broadcast came. Governments crowded the air with languages and mathematics and the music we send to graves when we pretend they are doors. Lasers reached for it. Radio stroked it. The thing did not even blink. When the anger rose, missiles rose with it. Beautifully engineered spears hauled from bunkers into daylight. And they did what spears do, and the thing did what objects do when they no longer recognize force as a concept. The shock fronts broke like waves against a cliff. The arrays did not scar. The eyes did not close. People adjusted. Humanity always does. Catastrophe, when stretched into days and weeks, becomes a kind of routine. The queues at petrol stations thinned. The shelves in markets filled again. And the graphs that once measured terror began to slope gently downward. The price of beans, briefly treated as though it were the last currency of survival, returned to its familiar fluctuations and then was forgotten. Some bent their knees. The object's silent orbit birthed new faiths overnight, sects that declared it an angel or a judge, or the final book in which all our names were written. Others drowned themselves in alcohol or noise, denying meaning rather than assigning it. A larger number simply retreated into the narrowness of survival, repairing roofs, fitting teeth, testing brakes. If apocalypse refuses to finish its sentence, the human instinct is to resume the old chores. But above the mundane hum of civilization, the mountain remained watchful. We did not adjust. We could not. The telescope stared, night after night, into a presence that would not yield its nature, We measured spectra that flattened into silence, as though the thing refused to acknowledge the very physics we relied upon to define reality. We catalogued null result after null result, until absence itself became our data. I grew quieter with every failure. My words dwindled until conversation felt like an intrusion. I began to sleep in the office, stretched on a couch meant for brief naps, because the dormitory, once comforting, looked childish, like a doll's house built to shelter fragile illusions of safety. I was ashamed of my furniture, of every human construction that pretended permanence. An ophonym circled, always circling, its vast eyes pivoting with patient indifference. Sometimes they faced the oceans as if counting tides. Sometimes they regarded the deserts, the crowded cities, the forests. It was taking attendance, I thought, but never calling a name. The silence of it was worse than a voice. At least a voice, however alien, would betray intention. When it left as no comet ever could. The curve of acceleration spiked beyond the reach of numbers, a vertical surge that mocked our mathematics. The telemetry spasmed, scribbled nonsense, and then tore itself apart. In the sky, it carved a wound, an incandescent seam, a scar of white that stretched from Earth's orbit to the Kuiper belt in the time it takes to mispronounce a star's name. That wound did not close for days. Even when the light had gone, instruments whispered of disturbances, as though space itself was struggling to remember how to heal. We traced it to the very quadrant where we had first seen Ophanim, near Neptune's frigid path, and then the trail simply disappeared. I write this now because silence is heavier than paper. In the town below, people hang ribbons on the statue of a condor in the plaza. Some read "thank you," others come back, and others still stay gone. The funding agencies reconvened in their sterile rooms and spoke of planetary defense, as if new committees could defend us from what had stared unblinking at the sum of our civilization. The news, obedient to its cycles, returned to football scores, the weather, the price of copper. I cannot summon the energy to despise them. Perhaps this is survival. But here, in the dome, I cannot forget. The fans breathe steadily. The ridge lines cut black silhouettes against the sky. The stars burn sharp and ancient. I tell myself this is what the sky has always been. Unowned, unsupervised, indifferent. I repeat it like a prayer, like a shield. And then I remember how something used the sun to hide from us, how it leaned close, wheels within wheels, eyes upon eyes, and looked directly at us, at me. And I know the truth that all of us will deny until it returns. Whatever we are, however small, however unready, we were found.